There is a moment, quiet, unannounced, almost invisible, when an old version of you begins to end. No trumpets, no sudden flash of lightning across the sky. Just a subtle shift in how the world feels beneath your feet. You wake up one ordinary morning and something that used to matter doesn't matter the same way anymore. A place that once felt like home suddenly feels like a hallway you're passing through. A conversation that used to excite you now leaves you tired before it even starts. And you don't know why. You just know that something in you has moved. Most people miss this moment. They rush past it, distracted by deadlines, notifications, the noise of everyday survival. They mistake it for a mood, a bad week, a passing restlessness that a weekend or a vacation will fix. But some of you, and if you're listening to this right now, some part of you already knows. Some of you are standing exactly in that moment. You are on the edge of something. Not a breakdown, not a crisis, a becoming. This is not a speech about hustle. It is not a speech about grinding harder, waking up at 5 in the morning, or forcing yourself into a version of success that was never yours to begin with. This is something older than that, something quieter and far more honest. This is about the architecture of the human soul and the way it rearranges itself right before it grows into something larger than it was. Because here is the truth: nobody sits you down and tells you, growth doesn't usually feel like growth while it's happening. It feels like loss. It feels like confusion. It feels like standing in a room you've lived in for years and suddenly not recognizing the furniture. And if you don't understand what's happening inside you, you will spend that sacred, disorienting season trying to fix yourself, trying to go back to who you were. When the truth is, you were never meant to go back. You were only ever meant to go forward. So today we are going to talk about 4 signs, 4 unmistakable signals that something ancient and intelligent inside you has begun its work. These signs are not random. They are not signs of falling apart. They are the architecture of transformation, the fingerprints left behind by a self that is quietly, relentlessly, becoming who it was always meant to be. And by the time we are finished, you will understand that what feels like an ending in your life right now is in fact the opening line of the most important chapter you will ever live. Let's begin with the first sign, because it is often the one that arrives quietly, almost apologetically, and yet it changes everything. The first sign is this: the things that used to satisfy you no longer do. You used to scroll for hours and feel entertained. Now it feels hollow, like eating food with no taste. You used to enjoy certain conversations, certain rooms, certain crowds, and now you find yourself sitting in the middle of them, feeling strangely alone, like you're watching your own life from outside a window. You used to chase certain goals with hunger, and now, even when you reach them, there's a strange emptiness where celebration should be. This is not depression, though it can feel similar if you don't understand it. This is not ingratitude, though the mind will try to convince you that you should be ashamed for feeling this way. This is expansion. This is your inner world quietly outgrowing the container it used to fit into. Think about it like this: a seed does not remain comfortable in its shell forever. At some point, the very shell that protected it becomes too small, too tight, too confining for what the seed is about to become. And so nature does something that looks, from the outside, like destruction. The shell cracks. It breaks apart. It falls away. If the seed could feel, that moment would probably feel like loss. Like something is ending. Like something safe and familiar is being torn from it. But that cracking is not the end of the seed's story. It is the very beginning of the tree. You are that seed right now. The version of it fit perfectly into your old routines, your old relationships, your old definitions of happiness. That version is cracking open. And it is supposed to. It is not a malfunction. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is the sign that something right is finally happening. The discomfort you feel when things that used to satisfy you no longer do is not your soul breaking. It is your soul making room. Here is what most people get wrong at this exact stage of their life. They interpret the loss of interest as a loss of purpose. They think, if this doesn't excite me anymore, maybe nothing will. If I'm not thrilled by what used to thrill me, maybe I'm broken, maybe I'm ungrateful, maybe I've lost the ability to feel joy altogether. But that is not what's happening. What's happening is that your definition of joy is upgrading in real time, and the old formulas simply cannot keep up with the new equation you are becoming. You are not lost. You are simply between maps. The old map described a world that no longer exists because you are no longer the person who needed that world. So if you have been feeling that strange, quiet dissatisfaction, not dramatic, not explosive, just a persistent hum of "this isn't quite it anymore," do not panic. Do not rush to fill that emptiness with something louder, faster, or more distracting. Sit with it, let it breathe. That emptiness is not a void to be feared. It is fertile ground. It is the space where your next chapter is quietly being written, line by line, in a language your old self doesn't speak yet, but your new self is already learning fluently. Now let's talk about the second sign, and this one is subtler, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The second sign is this: you begin to crave silence and solitude in a way you never did before. Maybe you used to be the person who needed constant company, constant conversation, constant noise to feel alive, and now, more and more, you find yourself craving stillness. You want to sit alone with your coffee and just think. You want to take a walk without your phone. You want to turn off the television, not because you're tired, but because the noise feels like it's covering something up that you're finally ready to hear. This is not isolation in the unhealthy sense. This is not withdrawal born from fear or sadness. This is your inner self asking for an audience with you. Understand something important here. Silence is not empty. Silence is where your intuition finally gets a chance to speak without being shouted down by the noise of the outside world. Think about how rarely most people actually sit with themselves, undistracted, unhurried, uninterrupted, even for 10 minutes. The mind that never gets silence never gets clarity, because clarity requires space and space requires quiet. When you start craving solitude, what is actually happening is that a wiser, older, more grounded version of yourself is trying to get your attention. And it can only be heard in the quiet moments, the same way you can only hear a whisper in a room where everyone else has stopped talking. This craving for solitude often frightens people, especially if they've built their identity around being social, being available, being needed by everyone around them. They worry that wanting alone time means something is wrong with their relationships, or that they are becoming distant, or cold, or strange. But solitude, chosen consciously and used wisely, is one of the most powerful tools for growth that exists. It is in solitude that you finally hear your own voice underneath all the voices you've absorbed from other people. The expectations of your family, the opinions of your friends, the pressure of your culture, the noise of comparison. Solitude strips all of that away, layer by layer, until what's left is simply you, honest and unfiltered, maybe for the first time in years. If you have been craving quiet lately, if you've been wanting to disappear for an hour, a day, sometimes even longer, not because you hate the people around you, but because you need to hear yourself think, trust that instinct. It is not selfish, it is not antisocial, it is the wisest, most self-respecting thing you can do at this stage of your life. Because before you can build the next chapter of your story, you need to know, clearly and honestly, who is actually writing it. And you cannot know that in a room full of other people's noise. Now the third sign, and this one is deeply connected to your relationships, though it doesn't always feel that way at first. The third sign is this: you stop trying to convince people to understand you. There was a time when you needed people to get it. You needed your choices explained and justified and approved of. You needed the people around you to nod along, to validate the path you were walking, to tell you that yes, this makes sense. Yes, you're doing the right thing. And when they didn't understand, it hurt. It made you doubt yourself. It made you defend your decisions like they were on trial in a courtroom, made of people who had no real stake in the outcome of your life. But something changes. Quietly, gradually, you start to notice that you no longer feel the urge to explain yourself the way you used to. Someone questions your choices, and instead of launching into a defense, you simply say, "I understand why you see it that way," and you let it go. Someone doesn't understand why you left that job, that relationship, that city, that version of your life, and instead of needing them to understand, you find a strange, calm peace in simply knowing that you understand, and that is enough. This is one of the most important markers of psychological and emotional maturity that exists, and almost nobody talks about it directly. It is the shift from seeking external validation to trusting internal clarity. As children, we are wired to seek approval, because approval once meant survival. A child who displeased the tribe risked being left behind. That wiring doesn't disappear just because we grow up. It has to be consciously outgrown. And when you finally start outgrowing it, it can feel almost eerie at first, like you're losing your grip on the people around you, because you're no longer performing for their approval the way you used to. But this isn't disconnection. This is authenticity. This is the moment you stop living your life as a performance for an audience and start living it as an honest expression of who you actually are. And ironically, this is often when your relationships become deeper, not shallower, because the people who stay around you once you stop performing for them are the people who actually love the real you, not the curated version you built to be understood and accepted. If you have noticed that you care less about being understood and more about being honest, if arguments that used to consume your energy for days now barely register, if you find yourself saying, "That's okay, they don't have to agree with me," and actually meaning it, this is not you becoming cold or distant. This is you becoming free. You are stepping out of the exhausting job of managing everyone else's perception of you, and stepping into the far more sustainable job of simply being who you are, openly, without apology, without the constant need for applause. And now, the fourth sign, the one that ties everything together, the one that often arrives last because it requires the first three to have already done their work. The fourth sign is this: you feel simultaneously terrified and excited about the same unknown future. This is the strangest, most disorienting feeling a human being can experience. And it is also one of the clearest signs that transformation is genuinely underway. It is the sensation of standing at the edge of something you cannot fully see, something you cannot fully plan for, something that has no guaranteed outcome. And instead of only feeling fear, you feel a strange thread of excitement woven through that fear, like your whole body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Fear alone usually means stagnation, the fear of a threat, the fear that makes you want to retreat, protect, shrink. But this is different. This is fear laced with anticipation. It's the same physiological sensation you had as a child standing at the top of a high diving board, looking down at water that suddenly seemed impossibly far away, heart pounding, legs shaking, and yet, underneath all of that fear, a pull, a hunger, a part of you that wanted to jump more than it wanted to stay safely on the ledge. That feeling, trembling and thrilled at the same time, is the unmistakable signature of a threshold. You do not feel this way about things that don't matter. You do not feel this cocktail of terror and excitement about a future that holds nothing meaningful for you. You feel it precisely because some deep, intuitive part of you already senses that what's on the other side of this uncertainty is significant. Your nervous system is responding not to danger, but to magnitude. It is the body's way of saying, this matters, this is real, this could change everything. Most people, when they feel this mixture of fear and excitement, immediately try to resolve the tension by leaning fully into one side or the other. They either let the fear win and retreat back into the comfortable, familiar life they already know, numbing the excitement until it goes quiet again, or they recklessly chase the excitement without any wisdom, making impulsive decisions just to escape the discomfort of uncertainty. But there's a third option, a wiser option, and it is simply this: let both feelings exist at the same time without needing to eliminate either one. Let the fear remind you that this matters. Let the excitement remind you that you are capable of meeting it. You do not need to feel only confident to move forward. You only need to feel both, and move anyway. This is what real courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of fear alongside forward motion. Every meaningful chapter in human history, every person who has ever built something extraordinary out of nothing, every artist, every entrepreneur, every parent taking a leap for their family, every person who left something familiar to build something better, every single one of them felt this exact tension, terrified and excited in the same breath about the same unknown future. And they moved forward anyway, not because the fear disappeared, but because they finally understood that fear and excitement are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin, and that coin is called meaning. So now, let's bring these four signs together, because individually they might feel confusing, but together they tell a very clear story. When the things that used to satisfy you stop satisfying you, your soul is signaling that it has outgrown its old container. When you start craving silence and solitude, your inner voice is asking for an audience with you, finally ready to speak clearly instead of being drowned out. When you stop needing people to understand you, you are stepping out of performance and into authenticity, trading a fragile identity built on approval for a stable one built on truth. And when you feel that trembling mixture of fear and excitement about your future, you are standing exactly where every meaningful transformation in human history has begun, right at the edge of the known, staring into the unknown, alive in a way that comfort never allowed you to be. If you recognize even one of these signs in your life right now, understand this clearly. You are not falling apart. You are not losing your mind. You are not behind, broken, or failing at life while everyone else seems to have it figured out. You are in the middle of one of the most sacred and necessary processes a human being can go through, the quiet, invisible architecture of becoming. And it rarely looks glamorous while it's happening. It looks like confusion. It looks like restlessness. It looks like tears you can't quite explain and questions you can't quite answer. But underneath all of that discomfort, something extraordinary is being built, brick by brick, in rooms of your mind you haven't even fully explored yet. Here is something worth remembering the next time doubt creeps in and tries to convince you that you're simply lost. Nothing in nature grows without first appearing, from the outside, like it's struggling. The caterpillar does not gracefully transform into a butterfly. Inside that chrysalis, its entire body dissolves into something that looks less like transformation and more like collapse. If you open that chrysalis in the middle of the process, you would not see a half-formed butterfly. You would see something that looks like it has failed, like it has fallen apart entirely. And yet that very dissolution, that terrifying formless in-between, is precisely what allows the wings to eventually form. There is no shortcut around that stage. There is no version of that transformation that skips the mess in the middle. You are allowed to be in your mess right now. You are allowed to not have it all figured out. You are allowed to feel uncertain about your career, your relationships, your purpose, your next move, and still be exactly where you need to be. Growth was never supposed to feel like a straight line of confident, triumphant steps forward. Real growth is messy, non-linear, occasionally terrifying, and often invisible to everyone around you until one day it isn't. One day, the wings are simply there, and people will look at you and say, "How did you change so much?" When the truth is, you didn't change overnight. You changed in 1,000 quiet, uncomfortable, invisible moments that nobody saw, including, most of the time, you. So what do you do with this? How do you actually walk through this threshold instead of just surviving it? The answer isn't complicated, but it does require honesty. First, stop punishing yourself for outgrowing things. You do not owe your old interests, your old relationships, your old identity a lifetime loyalty simply because they once served you well. People change, seasons change. What nourished you 5 years ago might not nourish you today, and that is not betrayal, that is evolution. Give yourself permission to let go of what no longer fits, without guilt, without needing a dramatic justification, without needing anyone else's approval to do so. Second, protect your solitude fiercely. In a world engineered to keep you distracted every waking moment, choosing quiet is a radical act of self-respect. You do not need to explain to anyone why you need an hour alone, a walk without your phone, a morning without noise. That silence is not indulgence. It is maintenance for the most important relationship you will ever have, the one with yourself. Guard it the way you would guard anything else you know to be essential to your survival, because in a very real sense it is. Third, release the exhausting need to be understood by everyone around you. Not everyone will understand your path, and that was never actually a requirement for walking it. Some people will misread your growth as arrogance, your boundaries as coldness, your peace as distance. Let them think what they think. You are not responsible for translating your entire inner world into a language every single person around you is willing to learn. Speak your truth, live your truth, and let understanding be a bonus, not a prerequisite for moving forward. And fourth, when that trembling mixture of fear and excitement shows up, and it will, again and again, at every meaningful threshold in your life, do not wait for the fear to disappear before you act. It will not disappear. It is not supposed to disappear. Fear at that magnitude is simply your nervous system's way of saluting something significant. Let it exist. Let it ride alongside you. And take the step anyway, not because you're fearless, but because you finally understand that fearlessness was never actually the goal. Aliveness was always the goal. And aliveness, real aliveness, always comes wrapped in a little bit of trembling. Somewhere out there right now there is a version of you on the other side of this chapter. Calmer, clearer, more solid in who you are. Living a life that the current version of you can only sense in fragments, in dreams, in that strange pull you feel towards something you can't yet name. That version of you is not a fantasy. That version of you is being built right now, in this exact discomfort, in this exact uncertainty, in this exact season that feels more like falling apart than coming together. Trust the process, even when, especially when, you cannot see where it's leading. Trust the quiet dissatisfaction, because it means you're outgrowing what was too small for you. Trust the craving for silence, because it means your own voice is finally getting loud enough to hear. Trust the loss of interest in being understood, because it means you're finally choosing truth over performance. And trust that trembling excitement underneath your fear, because it means you are standing exactly where every meaningful chapter in human history has ever begun, right at the edge, terrified, alive, and ready. This is not the end of your story. This has never been the end of your story. This is the sound of a new chapter turning its very first page, written not in certainty but in courage. And that, more than anything else, is how every extraordinary life has ever truly begun.